Raj, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thanks for having me on this virtual platform today. So, parents, they're a challenge. They are also one of our greatest allies when it comes to supporting young people in sport. So, today's session, we're going to have a bit of a kōrero about parents. We're going to share some learnings that we had from a monitoring evaluation project we did recently, that we look to understand the impact of parent education interventions. We're going to look at some of the challenges that you guys have got, things like unrealistic expectations, lack of support, and we're also going to kind of look at what are some of those solutions so that we can work better with parents, because as I say, they are such an important part of school sport. I'll present some information. There'll be some thinking and reflecting time and some actions from you guys. There'll be several points in here. As Roger said, we're keen to get your thoughts and get your feedback in the chat. And so I've got Roger in the background sort of monitoring that. So over the next 50 minutes, we're going to have a bit of a chat, bit of kōrero around parents, and hopefully get started on ways of better working with them. So today is step 1 of 20. It's a complex area. There are lots of challenges. So we won't solve everything today, but we will explore some of the stuff together. So let's kick in. In April last year, we undertook a project with 6 organisations, so 4 RSTs and 2 NSOs, that were involved in delivering some parent education interventions, so workshops or campaigns. And what we did is we tried to better understand the impact of those on the attitudes and behaviours of parents. The 6 organisations had all identified problems that needed to be solved. Things like poor sideline behaviour, parental pressure and expectations, so parents having an overemphasis on winning over development, a lack of understanding about selection, and also a parent's lack of understanding about training load, injuries, development versus high performance, and the detrimental effects of early specialisation. So across all 6 of the projects, parents were in the roles of supporters, as opposed to parents being coaches and or volunteers. So we did some interviews with some focus groups with parents. We wanted to understand their motivations for taking part in the initiative. So why were they showing up to workshops, or why did they interact with a social media campaign or something like that? We wanted to understand their beliefs about their role. So do parents really understand what their role is in relation to young people's sport? And do they understand what quality experiences are? And then we wanted to understand their experience and engagement with the initiative. So if it was a face-to-face workshop, how did they find it? What was interesting about it? And then really, really importantly, we wanted to understand what key takeaways or impact or change that those initiatives had on parents. So we really did a deep dive with 6 projects to really understand, okay, if we're going to be putting some education around parents and we're going to help them better understand what quality experience and what their role is supporting, what impact is that going to have? These were 6 very different types of projects. Some were more social media based campaigns through to face-to-face workshops. And 2 of the photos there, the one at the bottom left is Touch New Zealand and the AFI project, and the one on the top right of the presentation is at Sport Hawke's Bay, where they did some face-to-face workshops. So what did we find out? So things that contributed to successful interactions with parents were things like the design and the content of the initiative, that they had a clear purpose, they had clear objectives, they understood what they were trying to achieve, that they were relevant to their target audience and the groups of the communities, so that the actual information and the content that was involved was relevant to that group. We worked with Badminton New Zealand, and they were doing some workshops with parents that were involved in their under 15 national program. And so the information was really targeted around what do those parents need to know specifically. In that design and content of initiatives, they included content that's up-to-date, relevant, interesting and applicable. And importantly, that the information that was presented in those workshops was also aligned to other areas of the sport or organisation. So parents were getting educated in something and it aligned to the other areas that they may be interacting in the sport with. The delivery and the implementation of the initiatives was really, really important. So face-to-face and in places that parents are already engaging in their kids' sporting activity had the most impact. And that seems fairly obvious when we think about where are we're face-to-face with people, we're talking to them, we're more likely to be able to have a two-way conversation and to help them understand what quality sport is. Where initiatives had positive and appealing and aspirational titles, helped. So there are a number of different projects that are around. One like Raising a Champion is an example, has an appealing title. As a parent, I want to be able to raise a champion, so this is the session that I'm going to come along to. And the other part of the delivery and implementation stuff is around delivered by credible and good communicators. Interestingly, what was really important to parents was that they had resources to follow up afterwards, that they're useful, relevant, in-depth content, and actually that the parents wanted to be able to take away resources from the workshops or sessions that they'd been part of and being able to take that to have a conversation with their kids. So it's not just about me as a parent, it's me as a parent and how I then can communicate that with my children. And also the promotion of initiatives. So parents are a challenging group to get hold of, as I'm sure most of you are aware. So where we were able to promote through multiple channels, so personal invitations, school newsletters, social media platforms, sports venues, and really importantly, the word of mouth from other parents. So not undervaluing the role that other parents can play in convincing others to either come to events or interact with some content. Put simply, programs that were pitched with the right messages, had engaging content, had follow-up resources, had greater impact on the parents that were involved. Easy? Sure, why not? On the flip side, obviously, things that didn't work, where there was limited resources, where there was limited time for the people that were delivering the resource to actually give to the promotion and those kind of things, where there was insufficient information provided and the lack of resources that they could take away with them. And obviously the ineffective reach piece. So where initiatives had difficulty connecting to attendees, where they were simply just pushing messages out and hoping for the best. And from the interviews that we conducted with parents, they told us that they want more informative opportunities. They want opportunities that are at their kids' sporting events and for everyone to be speaking with the same voice. And so by that, they mean rugby, netball, hockey are all saying the same thing. What's important? What's quality sporting experience look like and how can I best support? And then I guess in your settings in the school space is that the teachers in charge, the heads of sport, the principal and the coaches are all on the same page, speaking with the same voice as well. Parents welcome and have an appetite to learn more about better supporting their kids' sporting experiences. They want to provide the best support they can. And often they really do believe that they are providing the best support they can. They're championing for their kids. They're asking the questions, but sometimes it's misdirected. And so how can we nudge just to nudge them a little bit better around what actually quality sporting experiences and what their roles are. And importantly, and something that's probably overlooked, is that parents who participate in initiatives are valuable connectors and effective influencers of others. So they become your tribe. They start sharing your messages. In a school of 1,000 students, there are anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 parents or caregivers. So we can't get to everybody, but if we can get to some, and then get them to start getting to others. So that flow-on effect. Whew. So pause for a moment. It's enough talking from me. What I'd like you guys to do is just take a moment, have a think about what we've heard so far, write down maybe two or three things that you found interesting, thought-provoking or challenging, and really quickly, just type one of those reflections into the chat. And then I'm gonna fling to Roger, and we're gonna see if we've got anything that we can mention, have a quick chat about.
Pretty quiet in the chat, Kelly.
Pretty quiet in the chat. So just checking that everyone is able to find the chat function. It should be a little on the bottom of your screen, and it's a little speech bubble, or up the top there.
Yeah, so any difference between parents of tamariki and parents of rangatahi?
Yeah, so parents of tamariki have much more of an influencing role, and we're going to dive into that just in a little bit. Certainly parents of rangatahi influence differently, and have a different decision points, I guess, with older kids.
Who are the experts, incredible communicator experts to deliver education around parent?
So where there are credible experts is an interesting one. So I think parents are looking for people that have experience, either as coaches. You know, there's a lot of the initiatives that we were working with, the deliverers of the initiatives were coaches previously, so have that sport experience, and are able to communicate well with those parents. I mean, some of it may be their parents themselves, and so their ability to relate to the audience as well is an important part. Cool.
One of the things that we've heard during COVID is kids are telling us that they're having a fantastic time without parents on the sideline. Coaches are telling us the same thing. Umpires are saying they're having a far more enjoyable time refereeing games. So maybe having parents as supporters of their kids' sport is not the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And interesting, I had a conversation this morning, and one of the regional sports trusts is looking to do some insights gathering around exactly that, around what is the impact of COVID been on kids and on coaches, because parents haven't been able to be right on the sidelines. So parents better understanding what quality support actually looks and feels like. So watch this space is probably something to add into that.
And I know we'll probably get to it as well, just about you know, the parents that are overly competitive and how other parents manage the poor sideline behaviour of other parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll touch on some of that as we move through. So let's see if we can get this back moving again. There we go. So let's start at that very top and talk really quickly about the key influences of youth sport. So key influence enablers involve our parents, our teachers, our peers, and our coaches. And at different times in a young person's life, each of those will have a different level of influence and a different impact. Parents are really influenced differently in youth and rangatahi sport compared to those of primary age tamariki. They move into different roles, can be at different ends of the spectrum. Peers certainly have much more of an influence on rangatahi than parents do. And an important component of parent education is actually around supporting parents to understand what their changing role looks like. So how do they become a better supporter when their kids are getting older? What we know from research is that young people who perceive their parents' involvement in sporting participation as more supportive and less pressuring have been shown to experience a higher competence, enjoyment, and intrinsic motivation towards sport and rec. So where parents are supportive in the right ways and in ways that their kids find meaningful, they're more likely to continue to engage in sport. And parents also play a number of different roles in a young person's life and a number of different roles in school sport. As many of you know, parents are a significant volunteer base, and up to somewhere around the 53% of volunteers in community sport have a child participating in that sport. So they are really, really invested. We'll unpack a little bit more about the roles in a second. Starting at that top place, a good place to look at the roles that parents play is also an important time to look at what role sport plays in our schools. So a strong school environment starts with a culture that's established by the leaders, that has operational, and as we drop into a vision, and all of our operations underneath it are aligned. It includes communicating a vision of philosophy, evidence-based planning, resourcing and support, and that our policies and procedures all line up. So our parents are just one part of this bigger picture, and where we want to be able to start looking at how we can best work with parents, we really need to understand the role that they play within our school, and also what does school sport look like. So have this in the back of your head, who's involved, all of that in the back of your head as we move through this next little bit. So jumping into the roles that parents play in youth sport, they're a supporter, they're a motivator, they're a role model, they're a decision maker for rangatahi. So financial decisions and also attendance and engagement decisions. As I've said before, a supporter, the role that they play in a tamariki looks very different. And so part of educating parents is around helping them to understand how they change their role as kids get older. And then more from your perspective, they're a spectator. So they're often, the sideline is the only connection that you might have with your parents. They could be a coach or a manager. They could be a volunteer. So they might be the ones that are carpooling. Jump in the back of the van, kids, we're off to some school sport. And they may be a committee member. They may be on a netball committee. They may be on a rowing committee. Or they may be part of the board of trustees. So understanding the role that parents play in our environment is really important, because the role that they play will determine the type of information that they receive, the frequency of that communication, as well as the method, so how you actually communicate with them, any programs or workshops that they're involved in, and how invested they are. So how invested are they actually in that young person and in that young person's sporting experience? So linking back to the findings from our evaluation project, understanding who you're interacting with, their motivations will help you interact well with them. So, what information do they need? We're going to dive a little bit into one of the roles, so parents as a supporter. And linking back to one of the sessions earlier from today, Huey talked about balance is better, and that parents as supporters need to understand what balance is better is, why young people play sport. And they play sport to have fun, to be challenged, to develop skills, be part of a team, or enjoy time with friends. So that role of a parent as a supporter, understanding what balance is better is, and then underneath that, understanding what quality experience in sport is. They need to understand why their kids play sport. They need to understand their role in supporting their kids. So in this case, on the sideline, what is Roger mentioned it just before, there's a whole load of anecdotal evidence coming back that kids actually quite enjoy not having mum and dad on the sideline. So actually, what does quality support on the sideline look like? On the flip side of that, obviously, is that parents as supporters need to understand the school's philosophy and approach to sport. So do they really understand what the school's philosophy to sport is? An important one, and one that probably comes up a lot for you guys, is understanding how they should communicate with the school and how the school then communicates back with them. An informed parent is an advocate. So they, do they understand how they should best communicate? And then equally, how are they going to, how does the school communicate back to them? And then also understanding the school's code of conduct. So where do they fit into that school's code of conduct? What can they expect from themselves? And what can they hold other parents to account to? So that other pushy parent on the sideline, does the school have a code of conduct that can support other parents to open that conversation up? Parents want to be able to provide the best support they can. We just need to work out what's the critical information that they need based on the role that they've got, and then how do we get there? So there are lots of different ways to be able to reach parents. There's some down one end which are get to a lot of parents but potentially have a really low impact. So social media, school notices, how many times have you put things in school notices, but maybe parents haven't read them. The other end of the spectrum being much more around workshops, face-to-face, getting to know a group of parents and utilising them as your tribe, as your workforce. Low reach, we're not going to get to everybody, but potentially has greater impact. So considerations need to be around what role they play, what type of information do they need, and then what's the method that you're going to get that information across to them. Ken Martell, when he was out last year talking about USA ice hockey, used the drip, drip, drip method. So the more information that we can drip feed, the more consistent information we can give out, the more times people hear that same thing, the more likelihood it's going to sink in. So going back up a level, how do we align our vision for school sport to the operations, to the day-to-day behaviours that we see from the people that are involved, from the policies that we've got, and then into those operation pieces as well. So, what roles do parents play in your school, and then what information do they need? What I'd like you to be able to do is just take a moment, think about one parent. Think about that one parent that you know of. What's their name? What role do they play? And what's that one piece of critical information that they need? And then pop that in the chat. So add that parent's role in capital letters, so supporter, and the critical piece of information that you think that they need. So just take a moment, start typing into that chat. Again, if you can find that chat function, it's up the top or down the bottom of your screen, depending on which way you're looking at it, and it should be a little speech bubble there. So we'll just take a moment, have a think, what's one of those parents? So a few starting to come through there, Rog?
Yeah. A lot of direct assistance in terms of the management of teams, particularly around the manager's role.
Cool. Yeah, a copy of the drawer is always a good thing to have.
One of the challenges, Kelly, obviously, is when you engage with parents as well. If you leave it too late into the season to start talking to them, then you lose that workforce that people are talking about here. If you really, I had the delightful experience of talking to a group of parents in an intermediate in Mount Maunganui some years ago, and a coach had been abused reasonably regularly by the parent group about her coaching and selection processes, but the parents actually So the obvious solution was to meet with the parents and meet with the kids and find out what everyone wanted out of the game. And the parents said no. They weren't interested in meeting with the manager or the coach. They knew what they were up to, and they just wanted the coach to listen to what their email chain of information was. Really tough.
It is. It's really tough. You know, we were, as I said before, parents are passionate about their kids, and they often believe that they are giving the best support that they can. And so how do we, in our roles, you know, and these guys' roles in the school setting, create some processes, create some, clearly communicate that what sport is about at our school, so parents have a better understanding. And then I think equally, you know, in that situation, how does the school support that coach and that manager?
Mm. Robin's got a question around how extensive is the whānau as opposed to the parents?
Yeah, this 5 of probably the 6 projects that we were involved with in that evaluation, it was direct parent or caregiver, so a really close relationship. The one that was slightly broader than that was work with Sport Hawke's Bay, and that was to a wider whānau group. And to Robin's comment there, expectations the same? Absolutely. I think quality experience doesn't just stop with mum and dad.
Just interested in Lucy's comment as well around you know, parents as supporters, but supporters as long as their kids are in the top team.
Yeah, hold that thought. I've got a good story coming up. We're talking about one of those challenges around those helicopter parents. So Lucy, we'll get to you.
And Timapara, not her specifically, obviously, but reputable coaches for kids, and the challenges of volunteer coaches who put their hands up to coach and then get criticised by parents.
Yep, absolutely. There, as I say, it's a challenging group, isn't it? And it's a challenging group to interact with as well. So now we'll keep moving along on this, and we'll start talking about some of those challenges. We know what parents we're dealing with, and we know what roles they play in that school environment. We know that they've got a critical influence role with their kids, but also, as you say, an influence role within the school itself. So let's have a bit of whinge bonding time and talk about some of those problems, those challenges that we're working with. Selby Gargiulo, who was a principal at Nelson College, who was then at Manurewa High School, I read an interesting quote from him in a book called I Know This to Be True. Some might have seen that. He says, often people say that Manurewa High School must be a lot harder than Nelson College. No way in the world. The hardest thing about Nelson College that hardly ever happens at Manurewa was mums ringing up whinging, questioning why their son didn't get picked for the first 11. And I'm sure that's something that a lot of you can relate to, is parents, the helicopter parent, Lucy, who is ringing up, whinging because their kids weren't selected for the team that they wanted to. So there's a number of different problems that exist there, but what's the real problem that's happening? So through research and through what we learned from our project last year, is that parent problems in isolation, so those that only address one issue, so like sideline behaviour, are less successful. Those that tackle either the cause of the problem or multiple areas have a greater likelihood of changing behaviours. So when we're talking about getting parents in the waka, if we bring parents together, arm them with a load of information about how to be a great sport parent, what sport looks like at your school, what quality experience looks like, and how they can best support their kids. But we send them out into an environment that doesn't match that. So mixed messages from coaches and trials processes, coaches that aren't providing quality experiences or competition structures that overemphasize performance, then we've got less likelihood of solving those real problems, and we're only really dealing with the symptoms. So what are some of those problems and how can we address them? Remembering, of course, that, and I'm making a generalization, 80% of the parents in our schools are fabulous and they're wonderful supporters, and they do put their hands up to coach when no one else will, and they do put their hand up to drive the bus when no one else will. It's just that there's maybe 20% that are causing us a bit of problems. So how do we mobilize more of the 80% and educate some of those other 20%? So we're going to go and we're going to talk about a few problems. I'm going to throw a few problems around in a minute. And the process that we're going to go through on this is actually let's go to the next layer of problem, and let's go to what's the real problem. So I ran through a red light today. Why? Because I was late for work, or because I woke up late, because the alarm clock broke, because I didn't check it at work, because I forgot to do it last night. So the real problem was that I forgot to check my alarm clock. And we're going to apply that same sort of principle into what are some of those challenges that we're coming across. So here's an example. The problem was, and this is a real life example, I'm sure one that a lot of you can also relate to. So director of sport was constantly getting calls from parents at the start of netball season. My daughter's the best player in the world. Why is she in the D team? Constant calls coming in. Sports director having to deal with multiple parents, not understanding the way that netball was being run. So why? Parents were receiving mixed messages and were unclear how netball was being run at the school. Why is that? Because there were inconsistencies between the coaches and the school messaging, and communication with parents was actually really, really limited. Why? There was no collective buy-in for a shared approach to netball and to the sport at the school. So the problems may have been that the sports director just solves the problem of people ringing her constantly and going, got to deal with this parent, got to deal with that parent. Whereas actually when we dig a little bit deeper, we look at what's the real problem we've got. And the real problem being that there was no collective buy-in for a shared approach. And we'll get to the solution in a second. But really quickly, just first off the bat, what are some of those problems that we're working on? And I know we've captured a few of those in that chat so far. So like, parents challenging the coaches. What I'd like to try and do is have a think, write down some of those problems that you're trying to solve. Is there any themes that's starting to emerge? And then share one of those problems in that chat function. So what's one of the problems that you're trying to solve at the moment? So once you've got a problem, chuck it in the chat function.
Not many comments in the chat, Kelly. Could be that my daughter really is the best.
Yeah, I'm sure your daughter's definitely the best.
Wow, she had a brilliant coach when she was younger. Yeah, naming of teams is an interesting one. What message does that send?
Mm. So parents challenging the starting lineups and the management of subs on the day.
Mm. Yeah, direct communication between coaches and students rather than with including parents.
Yep. Cool. That too many forms of communication.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I can see from what's coming through in that chat is one of the big challenges is how we communicate and how we communicate with those parents.
And when, perhaps, too.
Yep, absolutely. So, and again, we're not going to solve all of our problems today, but we're going to have a bit of an explore through a few different ways and a few different ideas. So if I find my, here we go. So what are some of those solutions? So the example that I gave you earlier around the netball parent, my daughter's the best, why isn't she in the team? The real problem being that there wasn't a collective approach, that there wasn't collective understanding, and people weren't talking the same, weren't aligned in what the netball program was about. So what happened was, over a series of meetings, so this is again, real life scenario here, over a series of meetings, so the teachers in charge of netball, coaches, some students, and importantly, parents. So some key parents, some influential parents were identified and brought in to form part of that solution. So I came together and actually planned for an information night for parents. Supplementary to that night, a resource was developed that reinforced the school's vision, their philosophy for sport, and outlined the netball program. So there was a resource that was developed that was intended to support what happened on that parent information night. Personalised invitations were sent to parents to come and have a cup of tea and a piece of cake, because we all know that food gets people in a room. But to hear about the netball program, so who was involved, what roles people played, and how parents could be part of the school's team, how parents were an important part of the way netball happened in the environment. So they felt like they were part of it. The resource that was developed was distributed to coaches. It was on the website, it was in the team kit bags, it was at reception, it was on the tables, and it was on the principal's table. And that was really deliberate to have that information on the principal's table, so that if things didn't go well and a parent decided they didn't like what they heard, and they decided to ring Selvi Gargiulo at Nelson College, I'm not sure, but that they were able to speak to what the collective approach was to netball. And so it was a parent evening, and sure, it didn't get to everybody, and it was, you know, if we look at these 4 areas of high impact, low effort, or low impact, low effort, or high impact, high effort, this was it was a pretty major piece of work to bring people together, to unpack what the vision and philosophy for netball was in that school, and then to develop a resource and run an information night. So the reach was quite low because there wasn't a massive amount of parents that engaged with it, but those that came became part of that netball team and became part of the way and the communicators out into the sector, into netball at the school. So there are a couple of different ways. You know, we're not going to solve all of the problems and the challenges that we've got with parents in one go, but there's opportunities to look at, hey, where do we really need to focus? What are some of those really high impact, high effort projects? What are some of those high impact but low effort? So some quick wins. You know, I think Huey spoke on the Balance is Better call this morning about the low hanging fruit. So where's the stuff? Where are those opportunities that we can just get some quick runs on the board. We can work with the willing, we can bring them on the journey, and we can get them to start advocating on our behalf as well. What we learned through our project last year was that effective tools and strategies for interventions involve the design and content that's relevant for the parent audiences, and that the information is accessible to them. So it's written, it's delivered in a way that resonates with parents, that's not overly technical, but it's something that they can understand, the language is appropriate. That face-to-face interactions and direct contact with parents, maybe that's on the sideline, that they have the most impact. That those are the ones where you create a connection with people and you can start moving them in the same direction. That supporting information through handouts, through communication is really, really important. That if they can have something that they can take away, they can look at, they can have a conversation with their kids about, that's going to be much more impactful. And that the promotion of initiatives, the promotion of information, the drip, drip, drip approach through multiple methods, so school notices, through social media, through notices that go home with kids, if they ever get out of their bags. I think that ultimately, you know, one of the critical messages is that programs in isolation that only deal with sideline behaviour are typically ineffective, and we need to look at the whole picture and then break that into smaller areas to create those collective solutions. We don't need to tackle everything all at once because that becomes overwhelming, but do we need to have a better plan of attack around how we manage and have some stepped solutions? There are, if I look at my screen, somewhere in the vicinity of 50 or so people on the call. So there's a massive amount of knowledge that we've got on this call today. So what would be amazing is if we were able to share some of those strategies or some of the things that you've used to better engage and better work with parents. Were there some quick wins? Was there a major project that you were involved in? So take a moment, have a think, and collectively, are there some ideas that we can share? Because one of the things I think I mentioned at the start of the call, what we'd love to be able to do is collect some of this stuff and share it out with everyone else. There are, as I say, 50 odd people on this call. So there's a lot of either great ideas or there's a lot of people that need some extra support as well. So take a moment. What were some of those strategies that you've had and used to better engage and work with parents, and chuck some of those ideas into that chat as well.
I think one of the important things you've mentioned, Kelly, is understanding what the different roles that parents play and the different motivations that they have being involved. And often what we see is a sideline behaviour campaign, which might be a sandwich board reminding parents that you know, referees are human and that it's not the World Cup, and those sorts of comments actually might be appropriate messaging for some parents with some motivations, but unless you're really clear about what messages you're trying to send and to whom, then that might be of limited benefit.
Yep, absolutely. It's certainly part of the jigsaw puzzle, you know, the drip, drip, drip kind of approach. And so having messaging that's visible in multiple different places is a step. But if we were to hang our hat on that being our only approach, then we're probably pushing our luck a bit.
Mm.
And I think one of the things you mentioned before, Roger, is, and I think someone put it in the chat as well, is the importance of rallying the parents early, and communicating with them early in a season. I think before there was a lot of people talking about parents as managers. And so how we engage with parents early in the season to educate them, but also support them to understand what's going to happen for the season.
And giving parents a voice as well. There's a number of comments in the chat around surveys to parents at the end of the season, seeking input into how the following season should be operating. Providing them with an opportunity to input that isn't tied to a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's making parents part of the solution as well. So they feel like they're invested in it. They feel like their voice is being heard and contributing to, yeah.
Do you think parents remember what they say at the end of one season?
I think parents remember the heated stuff that they say at the end of the last season. Not sure.
Important, isn't it, to probably make sure that you're testing again?
Yeah.
I've heard a whole lot of things at the end of the season. Here's what I'm going to do this year to accommodate those things, but then actually test them with the parents that are representing, have their kids involved at the beginning of the season as well.
Absolutely. So I'm conscious of time, and we're going to click through just another couple of things before we finish off. So, again, if there are other solutions, there are other things that work, either throw them into the chat or share that information out as far and wide as you can. So we talked before about all of the pieces of the puzzle. So what's our vision for sport at the school? What does it look like? What behaviours do we see from the people that are involved in our school, from our senior management through to teachers in charge? What is in our policies and procedures? What does that look like? What are our code of conducts? And do parents understand what the code of conducts are and how they see themselves in that? And then what happens from a delivery role? What actually does sport look like in your school? Is it about providing quality opportunities for everybody? Then how do we communicate that? And importantly, down the bottom there, how are parents connected to each of those areas? Our ability to influence and implement changes comes from that top, from a clear vision, from aligned people, from aligned policies and procedures, and then the delivery of sport that matches all of that. It is a hugely complex space, and it's a hugely challenging space. And parents have different roles through in all of that, and they have different motivations. So can we better understand what type of parents we're working with? What are their motivations? And then create initiatives, create ways of communicating with them or building them into the solutions. Importantly, who are the people that you need to influence? So your principal, your teachers in charge, your HODs. How do you build your internal tribe so that everyone's saying the same thing? And then how do you build your external tribe in that delivery and operations? So the coaches, the community, the volunteers, the low-hanging fruit, the parents that are already in the waka, and how do you mobilize them to spread, that the balance is better, the quality opportunities, the way that you want parents to behave in the school environment. How do you eat the elephant though? You eat it one bit at a time. Again, this is a really complex space and there's lots of different moving parts. And what I'm really conscious of is people not going away from this 50 minutes and going, oh, I've got to change the world. I've got to have all of the answers and I've got to change everything tomorrow. We don't. We can do little things. We can shift the dial in little places, so long as we know where we're heading to. So reflecting back on some of that stuff, we've talked today about what we learned through our parent education projects, and that the projects that have a clear vision, that understand the audience, that are direct to parents, have the most impact. We've looked at what different types of roles that parents play in the school environment. And we've talked about what's the critical information that they need, what are their motivations, and then how are we best to be able to, and when are we best to be able to actually interact with them. We've had a whinge bond about what are those challenges that we see from parents, and really diving into actually, is it the sideline behaviour, or is there something else that's creating those negative experiences? And we've given it an opportunity to kind of thrash out what are some of those solutions to that. Really, really quickly, last thing I'm going to get you to add into that chat function today, I promise, is either what's a key point, what's something that you found interesting today that you're going to take away, or what's a key action? What are you going to do as a result of what you've heard from today's session, or who are you going to connect with to share your ideas out? So fire that away into that chat as well. And then while people are doing that, there's a whole load of other places that you can look as well. So there's a ton of national sports organisations that have some parent resources. So the one that I've got on the screen there is Netball New Zealand's Smart Parent as part of their Netball Smart program. The Balance is Better website has lots and lots of information for parents. It also has a whole load of information for coaches, for administrators and things like that as well. And then the Old School Running Secondary School Sport document, which has an entire section dedicated to sport supporters. I think the other place to look, obviously, is your regional sports trusts. There's a number of regional sports trusts that are involved in delivering parent programs and parent education programs, and your RSD network, and you know, obviously you guys as well. You know, how do you connect and support each other?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thanks,
so it's a complex space.
There's a complex space, and I think you've done a great job of summarising what we know about parents and how to start changing our thinking about how we interact and relate to them. I do hope that people will share your ideas and follow some of the things that Kelly suggested. Be really clear about the roles, the motivations that parents have, value them because they are treasures. We couldn't run school sport without them. And those resources that Kelly's got up on this page are really good as well. During a couple of the workshops, a few people have been talking about maybe a closed Facebook page for sports coordinators to share information. We just are now so used to an online environment, aren't we, that it would be crazy not to carry on with this approach, whether it's online workshops like these, and this will be recorded so people can take what Kelly said over the last 40-50 minutes and play it to parents and to teachers and to coaches and to your senior management if you really want to as well. So it is part of the resource bank that exists. So if anyone is interested in setting up a Facebook page for you all to share this sort of information and good practice and ideas, then put your hand up. I know Rosie at Hobsonville Point has already done that, so I'm sure there are others. But thank you, Kelly. That's been really valuable.
Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope if anyone has any other messages to put into the chat before you go, then feel free. But Kelly's available at Sport New Zealand as well, part of the sport development team, and I'm sure she'd be very happy to feed back any ideas that she has that might help some of the challenges that you have dealing with parents and managing
Absolutely.
parents.
Absolutely. Always keen to help. Thanks, Roger.
Yes. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, everyone.